We just found out a lot about the Jets' dysfunction in 2023, and a lot of the key decision makers on the team are not looking very good today. We'll survey the damage today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, February 1st, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangreneNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, as you may have seen, yesterday a bombshell article dropped from The Athletic detailing a lot of Jets dysfunction behind the scenes. We're going to talk about that today with my good friend Michael Nania, who's joining the show. Let's jump into my chat with Michael Nania of JetsXFactor.com about the article written about the 2023 Jets by The Athletic. Joining us today, a good friend of mine, Michael Nania from JetsXFactor.com, back on the show. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Always good to be back.
Well, we're in the off season now, and usually the days are quiet, but this week we got a big piece of news. It was kind of a retrospective on the Jets season from The Athletic. Diana Rossini, who's a national reporter, Zach Rosenblatt, who's a local beat writer, combining to write an expose on a lot of the things that were happening behind the scenes for the New York Jets in 2023. And a lot of it does not paint the team and the leadership of the team in a positive light. I'm interested in your initial thoughts on this. That's for me, like, the most striking thing was the revelations about Robert Saleh, because I think a lot of the other stuff was just confirming stuff that we kind of assumed, but like the Saleh stuff was really bad. And I was not impressed by the job Saleh did, during the season, but I found a lot of the stuff that they revealed in that article to be shocking about the job he did. So interested in your thoughts and, whether you thought that was the most compelling part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different directions you can go with this. I mean, for this to be a random, Wednesday here at the end of January, Jet season is over 3-4 weeks in the books at this point, and then this just drops. It's a huge bombshell to get at this point in the off season. But I mean, I feel like a lot of it was kind of just affirming some of the things that we already thought and knew about this regime. It was interesting to hear, some of the specific details in terms of, like, because we all know Nathaniel Hackett is bad. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, or at least he did a poor job this past season. But to hear specific things like, not watching enough film or not making certain adjustments that other coaches ask for, things like that is, it's definitely, I would say, a sort of damning indictment on them when you're getting like these, very clear criticisms on a key coach of the coaching staff, because we all see the, the production of the unit, but, the Jets had injuries this season and all that. So it's easy to hide behind that. But then when you hear reports that, like, there are reasons that the coaches have a lot to do with that, then I think it is, a very crushing thing to hear. But at the same time, I think we already knew Hackett was bad, and then some of the other things in there as well. But, what you said about Saleh, I mean, I agree. It was definitely, because I think with him, some of the things that are laid out in the article, I also kind of had like thoughts that he was, that he had that mentality. I feel like in press conferences and just the actions of the team, you kind of got that sense of, complacency after Aaron Rodgers got hurt. Like, okay, we're off the hook now. Aaron Rodgers is injured. We should have no expectations. I already was kind of getting those vibes throughout the season. And that was really my biggest criticism of him and really the whole team, is the way they kind of just took a mulligan for the season after Rodgers went down. So then to hear, these very specific details of him, researching records of other coaches and how they did without their Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And, to kind of have the rallying cry of it basically seemed like he did have that exact mentality that we thought. So that was also crushing. And, when Aaron Rodgers got hurt, we knew the expectations were going to take a nosedive. That's fair. But you still would like to see the organization have that mentality of, you know what, it's next man up. We're still going to make the best of the season. We expected to be contenders. We're going to try our best to continue being that. But it really felt like they kind of mailed it in. And I think that's what this story, more than anything, kind of confirms, is that they really are so beholden to Aaron Rodgers that they felt like he goes down, they got nothing else to play for or nothing to cover for that, which, maybe that's realistic based on the talent of the roster, which is also on them. The lack of signing a backup quarterback and drafting offensive line, signing offensive line, that's also on them. So as realistic as that may be, to where they couldn't have competed seriously without Aaron Rodgers, I don't think it's an excuse to just say, let's go have the worst offense in history, because it was in terms of DVOA, the worst Jets offense we've ever seen. So I don't think there was an excuse to just be that bad. And it seemed like they were perfectly okay with it. And that's what I took away from the article the most, is it just kind of confirms the beholdenness to Aaron Rodgers and the complacency with, he went down and we're okay with what happens and we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. I don't think there needs to be any accountability. So that's what was the most frustrating part to me.
Yeah, and Saleh was quoted. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was essentially, "What do you expect me to do with Aaron Rodgers injured?" And I expect you to put together an offense better than that. It's one thing we know the offense is not going to be as good with Zach Wilson playing quarterback, but Zach Wilson was the quarterback in 2021 and 2022, and the offense was still better those years than it was in 2023. So that's not a great excuse. And the other thing is, it talked about how he pinned it all on Zach Wilson, and I mean, I look at that and I say, yeah, I know Zach Wilson wasn't great, but did you see the offensive line? Did you see the wide receivers? I don't see how you could just say this is all Zach Wilson's fault. I mean, there were other issues, and obviously the scheme. I mean, the scheme was just a catastrophe. I mean, we could spend probably a full week of shows breaking down how bad the scheme was this year. Yeah. But it's almost like he was disengaged from the real problem. It was and that's the thing. That's what strikes me is it's almost like once he had that excuse, it's like, okay, whatever. Can't expect me to do anything. Not even address the situation critically.
Yeah, and that's what's really frustrating because, again, we all knew Super Bowl off the table when Aaron Rodgers gets hurt. That's fine. Those expectations were gone. But this was, with Aaron Rodgers getting hurt, that was an opportunity to see, okay, coaching staff, front office, what do you guys bring to the table beyond Aaron Rodgers? That is what we got a chance to see this season. And what we saw, as, evidenced by this article, is a group of guys that is just going to ride Aaron Rodgers as far as he takes them. And I think that's a scary thing when you're trying to compete for a Super Bowl, because Aaron Rodgers is awesome. We all know that. He's one of the greatest of all time. I'm not going to say the greatest. I think Mahomes is coming pretty quickly for that, but one of the greatest of all time. But even he's only won one Super Bowl in his career. He can't do it on his own. And so if he couldn't do it with those Green Bay teams, which often had very good offensive lines, great coaching staff, I think Matt LaFleur has really proven that this year, that he's a good head coach. If they couldn't do it, then why are you going to do it just sitting back and letting Rodgers try to do it on his own? Because that is really the vibe that they kind of gave off this year. It's we got Rodgers, we're good to go. So it's first, it would, after the season to, from an ownership perspective, not fire any coaches, at least, prominent, meaningful ones, show no accountability in that regard. And then now to have this article coming out that shows a lot of very specific things that confirms some of the suspicions we had about their complacency. It's, it makes it difficult to be optimistic about the future when you have people leading the team that don't seem able or willing to kind of recognize their own flaws and correct them. So I think it's also just disappointing, I think, because despite the lack of wins, I think one of the things that was appealing, at least 2 years in with this new regime under Saleh and Douglas prior to Saleh coming in, is it felt like they were improving the culture. It was less of a, quote unquote circus compared to what it may have been in previous years. But now this season and Aaron Rodgers coming in and now this, it just feels like they're back to being that type of team again and not that, tight ship organization that's not letting things out. Information is just leaking out. So that's another thing, is just kind of disappointing to see them devolve back into that type of franchise.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with, and that's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. After all these reports, I think a lot of teams would make a coaching change. They may make a change in their front office, and they may need to use LinkedIn Jobs to help find quality candidates. Well, not the Jets. The Jets are sticking with Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas for another year, but who knows? Maybe next year they'll be making a change, and maybe they'll use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn is not just another jobs board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring's easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. This is why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. And LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is brought to you by DoorDash. The big game's just over a week away. The San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs will play Super Bowl 58 from Las Vegas for the NFL Championship. When the big day comes, you don't want to worry about cooking. You don't want to put all that effort in. That's where DoorDash comes in. DoorDash can connect you with restaurants all over the city. Lots of great places, no matter what you want to eat. You just open up the app, you place an order, and a Dasher will bring you a delicious meal. One restaurant in New York is Daily Provisions. They have anything you could want. If you're ordering for lunch, you might get a roll with pink, freshly roasted top ground beef with Munster cheese, crispy onions, and horseradish mayo. You can also order a bacon, egg, and cheese if you want to order a little bit earlier for breakfast. No matter what you want, DoorDash has you covered. And you should know that we can save 50% up to a $10 value on DoorDash when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Again, don't forget to use code LOCKED23 for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change, terms apply. And when I see them blaming Rodgers' injury for everything, I say, well, look, obviously you can't replace an Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, but for the offense to reach these depths without Rodgers in there, when you think about the team that they've built, I'm talking the front office right now, we're talking about the job the coaching staff did. When it gets that bad, the question is, we know what Aaron Rodgers brings to the table. If Rodgers is there, it'll be better. But that doesn't tell me that you're doing a good job. That just tells me, like, right. Okay, Aaron Rodgers, like, yeah. I mean, I could probably coach an offense with Aaron Rodgers playing quarterback.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is like the thing that makes you wonder, like, if the Jets win, how much of it is coach? How much of it is because they have quality coaching? And how much of it is because of Rodgers? Because we saw what this coaching looks like without Rodgers. And we always talk about how sometimes you can't blame a coach if he doesn't have talent. If a team's losing, it's not necessarily a sign of bad coaching. But if a team's winning, it's not necessarily a sign of good coaching. It could just be like a great quarterback lifting you on your back. So that's another issue I have with the way this has been approached.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what makes this season, not a mulligan in the way that the franchise wants to treat it. Because, like, I don't even think the win total mattered. It was more so the quality of the overall product throughout the season, because it's very easy to sit here and say, okay, they won 7 games. You put Rodgers in there, add 3 or 4, flip some of those close losses they had where they scored like 10 points or 6 points or whatever. Now you're in the playoffs and you're a contender. But I don't think it's that easy, because, like, how many of the games that they won easily could have flipped into losses? The majority of their wins, really, other than, I guess, Houston, maybe throw Denver in there, New England at the end. But the Giants game, they should not have won. The Buffalo game required all the turnovers, the punt return. The Washington game, they were a field goal away from losing. The Philly game, a fluky interception from Jalen Hurts. So, like, you don't get to just keep the wins and, add some losses or flip some of the losses when you put Rodgers in there. The bottom line is that the Jets were one of the worst teams in the league. I mean, they got outscored by almost 100 points. Their offense was, efficiency-wise, in terms of DVOA, as bad as it has ever been for this team. So the team showed that putting Aaron Rodgers in there is not going to elevate them to championship level. Maybe they'll be a playoff team or a wild card team, but when we just saw the Dolphins go down in the playoffs with what they did this season, the Bills, Baltimore, how is this Jets team going to win playoff games, even if they do get there? This season was an opportunity for the coaching staff to show that you throw an Aaron Rodgers in there, we can go all the way. But now it just looks like, okay, maybe he's so talented he could will you into the playoffs, but is he going to get you any further than that with this coaching staff? It's getting very difficult to see that.
And, one of the things that was mentioned in the article, which again probably didn't require Rossini or Rosenblatt to tell us, was Woody Johnson being starstruck by Rodgers. And one of the things that I think has been an issue with this team the last year or so is how deferential they are to Rodgers. And when I say that, I mean, it's like they bring in Hackett. They don't fire Hackett because he's Rodgers' guy. The guys they bring in, Lazard, Cobb, maybe Tim Boyle. And it's not even like I'm not even sure Rodgers is really making demands. I don't think it's a case where like Rodgers is like the bad guy and he's saying, you better do this. It's almost to me like a case where they're afraid to even ask because they're afraid they're going to upset him. It's like they're not even like broaching the topic of like, hey, this thing isn't working with Hackett. We gotta make a change. And I think about, different scenario, but Joe Douglas and Adam Gase were close. And Douglas could see like this isn't working. We have to make a change. And like Rodgers is a smart enough guy to see it wasn't working with Hackett. Even if he was close, it's not so much that like Rodgers is vetoing things. It's just they're afraid to go to him because they're just like don't want to. I don't know. That's like my read on the situation. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that, and that's really been my biggest criticism since. And you couldn't really say this before, he got injured because there's so much optimism. Seemed like it was going in a good direction. You could feel some of it, especially in hindsight, if you look back at Hard Knocks, some of the things Saleh was saying or different members of the team. But definitely after he got injured and looking at how all the signings he may have contributed to, how those guys played out, how Hackett played out, and then now you get into the offseason and you get all these comments from ownership and, the coaching staff, front office that, they all really they truly believe that it is okay what they just did. It all really does point back to everything you just said, where they are just kind of at Aaron Rodgers' mercy. And I was 100% on board with, I think most people were pursuing him, bringing him in. We all knew the situation they were in after last season, a great defense. It really felt like they were a quarterback away after last season, and offensive line as well. That's another story, but it really did feel like they were quarterback away. There weren't a ton of options. He was the best one, and they made a great pursuit, and they got him. So credit to them for that. But it just feels like ever since they got him, it's been way too much. It just feels like they've given up, the path that got them here, which was, patient drafting, developing talent. But now it's like they just kind of gave up on being a real football team since they got him, and it's more just like the Aaron Rodgers show. So we'll see what happens. Maybe Rodgers is still so talented and amazing that he could lift up the whole team, but it is disappointing to see like that there can't be any pushback to and like you said, because it doesn't seem like he is making demands. Like he denied that he made a shopping list or however they quoted it last offseason and said like he just made suggestions. And then I don't think that if they moved on from Hackett, he would like say I'm retiring or I'm out of here. I would hope that he was able to, see that clearly enough that it would be a reasonable move. So that's the thing. It does feel like they just kind of don't want to take any chances. Like we got Aaron Rodgers. Let's do whatever we need to take to make sure he's happy. Nothing else matters. So it's disappointing. I wish they would just treat him as far as you can, because you can't just treat him like a normal football player, but as much as you possibly can. I wish they just, say, here's another great player we got. We're going to keep building this team how we see fit. We're going to show accountability to coaches who shouldn't be here, players who shouldn't be here, and we're going to build this team as we would in any other season. But it just feels like Rodgers kind of dictates every move right now, which is, I would say, a frightening thing as you're looking to the future and seeing how they're going to try to build this into a championship contender.
This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. If you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Hill and comedian Andrew Schultz, well, now you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. And you should also know that Prize Picks offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. And Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with this injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, LockedOnNFL, for a first deposit match of up to $100 using Prize Picks. Yeah, and I think about like what happened in Green Bay the first couple of years with Matt LaFleur, because he did not love everything about Matt LaFleur's offense. And he was vocal about that. He said, there's things he didn't like, but he and LaFleur kind of met each other halfway and he won back-to-back MVPs. So clearly, sometimes like the player doesn't always know best. That's why you have the coaches. And, it's the coach's job to work with the players. Coaches need to figure out what the player is comfortable with, but you can't just always give the player exactly what he wants. So there was talk in the article about how, Hackett was calling plays in practice, and Rodgers like, no, we're not doing that. And like some of the other coaches were just like, why are you doing that? Why are you letting him do that? It has to be a partnership. It can't just be a situation where the player has all the control. And it doesn't feel like the Jets have struck that balance well.
Yeah, I mean, there's the one quote in that article. I think they said it's less of Hackett and Rodgers is less of a player-coach relationship. They said it's more of like a frat boy friendship or something like that. So, which, I mean, I like the idea that he's a, players coach, relates with guys. It seems like players like him, just, notwithstanding the play calling and designs, but just as a, teacher and as a person, I think they seem to like him. And it's good that Rodgers is comfortable. It seems like Hackett being there really helped him embrace the city and the new organization and all that. So I think that's great. But like you said, there has to be that dynamic to where like we're going back and forth exchanging ideas. It's not just I'm here so no one can get in the way of Aaron doing whatever he wants, because that kind of feels like all Hackett is there to do is just be like, someone else isn't the offensive coordinator who's going to push back against him. I'm here, I'm his buddy, so he can do what he wants. So and it also goes back to some of the hires that they've been exploring here with, the position coaches and stuff. I feel like every single coach that they try to hire, maybe Deuce Staley doesn't count here, who they didn't hire anyway, but most of them have been guys who they know and have connections with already with Saleh or some of the other Hackett top offensive coaches like Downing, Carter. They're just kind of staying within their circle. They're not going outside the box, looking to get new perspectives, trying to challenge each other, look themselves in the mirror and say, look, we were awful. I don't care that Rodgers wasn't here, O-line, whatever. This was historically bad. We need to change things. We need to be better. Let's get some new perspectives. Instead of that, it's just let's get our friends in here and let's just keep doing what we're doing. So the whole offseason and, continuing back through the season itself has just given off this sense of complacency and acceptance that I think is really disappointing, because Aaron Rodgers is going to add some wins. He's going to help, provided that he's healthy, but he's not even close to, by himself, going to get this team to championship level, which is what you got him to do, not to make the playoffs or win a playoff game. You got him to win a Super Bowl, and it doesn't feel like they're going to get there without being a little more, accepting of their own struggles and willing to make changes that need to be made.
One other thing that kind of alarmed me from the article is it gave me an indication that Woody Johnson is much more involved in the day-to-day stuff than I thought he was. And this is something that kind of flew under the radar. They didn't explicitly say it, but there was one point where they talked about how they made changes and they inserted more young players before a game, and Woody signed off on that. But the biggest thing was they mentioned that Woody Johnson's like scanning social media and like bringing fan criticism to the coaching staff. And I don't trust this coaching staff, but I trust the coaching staff a lot more than Woody Johnson and a bunch of fans on Twitter. And I'm like, I'm reading this. I'm like, what on earth is this? Like, this can't be real.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I make some decent points and I post them out there sometimes, but I do have the self-awareness to know that even a Hackett I would probably trust more than myself, and there's no reason you should be looking at anybody on social media and recommending that to the coaching staff. I mean, I had a sense of that because I know his account posts a lot, but I don't think it's him. It's probably like an intern or something. But there have been times where they've made a uniform decision that kind of seemed like all the fans were talking about it. And they're like, oh, we all want white on black, and then it's white on black. So I did kind of get that sense. So I wasn't totally surprised to see that. But to hear like suggestions about the offense is frustrating. And I feel like Saleh is too in tune with the narratives and criticism as well. It always, in most of his press conference, I mean, it feels like he always is aware of like what people are saying about the offense or how the team's playing, and he'll have, a defense ready. And then some of the things in this article also made it kind of seem like he's very, he very much wants to make sure he's defended out there. Like he wants to defend his narratives, knows what the criticisms are about him. So I think that's also not a good thing. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad. It's not a good thing. I mean, I also I haven't really discussed this too much with anyone else yet, but I'm curious what you think. What do you think of in terms of like the validity of the report? Because a lot of people are talking about like, Rossini and, Rosenblatt or whatever. Like they want to, maybe they have certain agendas and they want to put this out for certain reasons, or, who are the sources behind this article? I mean, what did you think overall in terms of like the accuracy of it and maybe the reasoning behind why it was published and why some of the, sources may have said what they said?
Well, I mean, I could speculate, but I've been doing this a long time, and I'll tell you, I saw a lot of the stuff you were saying. I've been doing this since like 2008. The podcast has been around since 2016, so I've seen a lot of these like exposés, and whenever they come out, these criticisms are always exactly the same. A lot of them hold up over the long haul, though. I think, I have no reason to doubt anything that they said. I think like in the NFL, there's a lot of times where like a reporter will talk to like three people and they'll get like vibes on the locker room, and that's not always accurate. I think they'll say like, oh, the locker room's at odds, and it might be like one person's perspective. And I always dislike that. And I'll be honest with you, I think like sometimes Rossini's a little bit guilty of that. But my thing is they spoke with 30 people. And I think like if you talk with 30 people within the organization, and I'm assuming that like they went like up and down the organization, I'm assuming they were talking to like low level people, high level people, that there are probably certain themes that come up over and over and over. And I think like when you speak with that many people, you probably get a good sense of what's going on within the organization. So, I mean, I don't, like there are certain things that are impossible to prove or impossible to disprove, because like there's certain things that are subjective, like is the defense, like, is there a split between the defense and the offense? Yeah. Like that's not right. An objective thing. This isn't like, did you score more points? Did you have more receiving yards than that guy? Like people may have different viewpoints on these things, but I would guess most of it is pretty accurate because they just had such a large sample size. And to me, like, that's the thing, is like they spoke with 30 people. So I have no reason to doubt this. There was something that really and again, like I've been doing this a really long time. I've been doing this over 15 years. There was something that like went off in my head like a siren though when I read this story. And it's when the team has a losing season, especially the Jets, where the owner pits people against each other, where you constantly see this front office coaching staff divide. And again, this is something I've seen over and over, is like when the Jets have a bad season, sometimes the coaching staff and the front office try and get their narrative out there. And this is a theory. I hope I don't get you in trouble for this. You're tying you to the show where I'm about to throw this theory out there. But I've seen this happen a lot with the Jets, where it's like the coaching staff wants to make sure the front office gets the blame. The front office wants to see the coaching staff get the blame. Something that stuck out to me was there was a lot of criticism of the coaching staff. You didn't hear a lot of criticism of the front office.
Yes, I also noticed that. I noticed that
the front office, there was no talk about what they did at tackle, which was a questionable strategy going in. And to the extent like there was criticism about the personnel moves, it was well, Woody made us sign all of Aaron Rodgers' friends. That there was a conspicuous lack of criticism for the shortcomings of the front office. That stuck out to me.
Yeah, I saw that as well. So, I mean, when I was trying to think about like who may have been the source of these reports, because most of them are anonymous, or all of them, it did feel like it was kind of front office sourced, because, like you said, like Joe Douglas, I forget if his name was even in there, but if it was hardly mentioned. There wasn't a lot of talk about why they did or didn't make certain moves in the offseason. It was all coaching centric. So that did kind of give the vibe of like, maybe this was coming out of the front office trying to deflect blame towards the coaches, if it were anyone. And then, you had the Rex Hogan news, which, a lot of people are, of course, going to immediately speculate, he's the rat. That's why he's out here. But apparently Rich Cimini is saying that was done weeks ago. It wasn't done
I don't mean
today.
to interrupt you, but here's the thing about that. They're saying like they found the source of within this story, though, there was also talk of that they had so much trouble finding the source of the Zach Wilson is hesitant to go back in story that Robert Saleh threatened to confiscate phones, which I don't know if they were like team issued, but you're not allowed to do that if it's somebody's personal phone. So like that's why that thing didn't make sense to me, because it's like they obviously can't find the source of these stories. So like how would they be able to find out if somebody did it within an hour and then fire them? It doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah. So I maybe it wasn't Hogan specifically, but the lack of front office criticism did kind of send that message of, maybe it was coming from there. But I mean, I'm with you. Like, I don't really have too many doubts about how accurate it is. I mean, maybe some things were, like you said, maybe sometimes it gets exaggerated a little bit, but I mean, I don't think they would, put this report out there with claiming they have 30 sources if it wasn't pretty accurate. And it does, most of the things in it kind of isn't necessarily new information. It's more just kind of examples that back up criticisms we already had. So, I mean, I'm not too skeptical of how valid it is, but more than anything, I think if there's one thing to take away from it, is just that it's unfortunate that, this team has become a source of drama once again, which, despite its story, it did feel like they'd kind of moved past that. Even with Rodgers coming in, the whole offseason felt very positive in terms of the vibes around the team that he brought to the team. But now it feels like there's a lot of non-football talk, as there used to be.
That's our episode for today. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks to Michael Nania for joining me. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you like the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up if you like it. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.